Thank you, Isabelle. Good afternoon, everybody. If you have had a look at Isabelle's poster in the hall, you may have noticed that this archive is one of the 3 corpuses of her project, D-scribes. And I am very grateful to her for inviting me here, although she knows how far from the digital age I am. 4 years ago, my colleague Alain Delattre and I myself decided to constitute an international team working on the Coptic side of the so-called archive of Papas. Papas was the pagarch of Edfu. Edfu in Upper Egypt, the town is circled on the slide, which means that he was the official in charge of the administration of the town and its territory in a period of time around 660 and 680. This archive is a collection of several hundreds of Greek and Coptic papyri found in a jar during excavations at Tell Edfu in 1922. You have here a picture of this excavation near the big temple of Horus in Edfu. And then the jar, supposed to have contained the papyri. Apparently, during the transportation of the jar to the Institut français d'archéologie orientale in Cairo, the papyri were all so severely damaged that not a single one is complete, and for many of them, only a few fragments escaped the destruction. The Coptic documents are still unpublished, by contrast with the Greek ones, which were published as soon as 1953 by the French papyrologist Roger Rémondon. And these Coptic texts are the main focus of our work. This slide shows you how the ceremologist imagined how the papyri could have been set inside the jar. And here an example of a Greek document. Most of the documents are letters addressed to papas, mainly administrative and sometimes private. In view of the state of preservation of the papyri, it is very difficult to give their number. All we can do for the moment is to estimate that the number of Coptic documents which are reconstructible probably exceed 150, but there are hundreds of fragments. You have here an idea of how the Coptic documentation is. On the left side, not complete, but satisfactorily kept document, and on the right, one of the numerous glaces with teeny fragments we are facing. As I said in the abstract, we are facing 2 interrelated challenges. The first is reconstructing the documents, and the second is identifying hands, or at least styles, which is quite difficult in the case of the administrative letters, because the scripts are quite standardized. We are combining different approaches, namely the general aspect of the script, the shape of some peculiar letters, the spacing between the lines, the color of the ink and of the papyrus, and the continuity of the papyrus fibers, as well as rhetorical formulas and linguistic features. Indeed, paleography alone is not sufficient, as we will see in the example I will show. Before we go further, just have a look on the names of the members of the team. It's a very numerous team. In fact, when we started 4 years ago, the younger part of the team were constituted of postdoctoral students, and we are quite happy to say that they all have a permanent position, or almost permanent. Even though our project is relatively new, we are not the first to deal with this Coptic papyri. From the beginning of the 2000s, and for more than 10 years, a French independent researcher, Mrs. Geneviève Favrel, spent several weeks every year at the IFAO, working with the Coptic papyri of Papa's archive. She was able to connect many fragments. before she died in 2010. Sorry. Her notes are difficult to use, and we do not know much about her method, but we certainly benefit from her efforts. For instance, the document you have on the screen is a reconstruct document from 5 different fragments, and we have now an almost complete business letter, which gives you an idea of the kind of documents we can expect. And it is a result of the work by Geneviève Favrel, completed with the identification of one more big fragment by Layoche-Berkes. Moreover, Layoche-Berkes and Esther Garel were able to identify other parts of the documents and other documents written by the same hand or concerning the same character, which is a certain Pamprepios, probably an agent of Papas. Admittedly, in spite of some successes of this kind, our progress is slow, and here it may be useful to recall our working conditions. Nobody of us is living in Cairo, and we are all scattered in different towns of Europe. Nobody of us is paid specifically to work on this project. We are meeting once a year for a week at the IFAO as far as possible. Of course, we have pictures and scans of almost every fragment, but these images were made at different times and are of different quality. What we would need would be long stays at the collection and a complete set of high-quality photos. This is still difficult to organize. While editing the documents, we are currently giving a minimum paleographical description according to the following criteria. This is just an example of how we work in the archive at the IFAO with all the glasses on the table. So a very empirical way of working, and also a collaborative work on documents, which gives some good results. So these criteria are first general description of the script, bilinear, majuscule, or quadrilinear, minuscule, what Lorelei already mentioned this morning, sloping or upright, existence, presence of ligatures or not. And then we try to determine whether or not some letters are particular shapes. We are aware of the existence of diacritical signs, superlineations of certain letters, which is a phenomenon specific to Coptic. We are equally considering the space between the line and the relative thickness or thinness of the pen, which is a reed, of course. A decisive progress came, in fact, from another side. A few months after the beginning of the project, we realized that some papyri, supposed to come from the jar, were kept at the Papyrological Institute of the Sorbonne in Paris. There are about 25 Coptic fragments, as well as some Greek. Florent Jacques, with ingénieur d'études at the Institute, started putting some order among them and became part of the team in 2018. His participation is helpful in many respects, as he doesn't know Coptic, but knows Greek. He looks primarily at the script and the general aspect of the papyrus, the fibers, the colesses, the color. Looking carefully at all the details and starting from the Sorbonne part, which is much less numerous, he succeeded in making many joins between the two collections. Furthermore, he made us understand that there are several ways of seeing and distinguishing scripts. Combining our points of view and methods have proved very fruitful, and before coming here, I had again a long discussion with him. And what I would like to do now is to show you some example of our collaboration. Let's start with the more spectacular case, which is this document called P. Apol because Apollonos Anno was the Greek name of Edfu. P. Apple 74, was known as the Greek document on the right side of the slide, which was an account, and the editor did not mention the presence of a Coptic text on the other side. So, on this document, and we find another part of it on the Sorbonne, basing on the very special shape of the letter mu, which is very wide, really wide, to the extent that I have never been able to find such a wide mu in any document. The same is true to a lesser extent for the letter P, just the line below. So, on the basis of the similarity of the script, and especially these two letters, we were able to reconstruct almost complete document. This document is the draft of a deposition by witnesses in the frame of an arbitration. Such a peculiar shape of a letter could allow us to identify easily other documents of the same hand. However, there is no hope to do so, because the Coptic document was not originally part of the archive. As it was a draft, it was subject to recycling, and it was indeed reused to write the Greek account by somebody in Papa's office. Be that as it may, this hand belongs to a certain style, typical for Coptic letters from the 6th and 7th century, everywhere in Egypt, bilinear and sloping and without ligatures. In Papa's archive, the hands belonging to this style are relatively easy to identify and to individualize because, first, they are less numerous, and second, beyond a certain standardization, they have some regular individual features. We can look at a second example of the same tile. Again, a document partially reconstructed thanks to Florent Jacques in November 19. This join, thanks to the lower part of the join, it's the only part which is certain, textually speaking, until now. It allows us to have the original width of the letter, and we already add the 8. The overall format, indeed, is important in itself, and also in order to estimate what is missing. It also confirms that the documents shared between the French Institute and the Sorbonne may have been separated roughly in the middle. Where and when and why, we don't know yet. Not all the fragments here are well placed. This is still work in progress, but there is little doubt that the writing is the same. And there are other fragments in the glass from where Florent Jacques took the fragment, which could certainly be connected to the same document. Being very regular, this script is not easy to characterize, not so easy as the previous one. Nevertheless, we can select the tau with the serif on the left, the kind of appendix, and the kappa, because the two parts are not joined, which is quite remarkable, although not very exceptional. This is for what I call bilinear writings. Administrative writings are more numerous and are less easy to describe because they mix several styles. And this mixing of styles, in my view, could be due to the fact that the scribes were trained primarily in Greek writing first and tended then to adapt to the Coptic style previously mentioned. Let's have a look on this papyrus, which is again a join made in last November. About this join, Florent Jacques explains that he had hesitated for some time because of the discontinuity of the fibers. The fibers between the upper fragment and the lower fragments are not in continuity. Then he realized that there were a coalescence between the two fragments. That is to say, a place where two sheets of blank papyrus had been glued together in order to make the roll from where the leaves would be cut afterwards. In such a case, the discontinuity was normal. In any case, the join is confirmed by the content, it's the same subject in both parts, and by the writing, where the most characteristic letter is the beta. Again, alone this letter, I have the impression that alone this letter is enough to identify this hand, and it is present on 3 lines and in the 2 different parts of the document. If we were able to find other fragments with such a beta, I think we could be fairly sure that it is the same hand. We have some other particularity here. There are some ligatures, as for instance, here you have here you have an alpha ligatured with a rho, and it's quite typical in this kind of writing. And the 2 different forms for the mu, we are going to see that perhaps better later. But here you have a mu with 3 strokes, and here you have a mu rather minuscule, and which this kind of different letters in the same, different shapes of letter in the same documents are quite common in administrative letters, probably for the reason I said before, that scribes are primarily educated in Greek writing. Then we were wondering about the 3 fragments on the bottom, whether they could or not be joined to the document. It's very difficult to say. There is a certain similarity in the script, but the fragments are too small. They are not enough characteristic, and I don't think for the moment we are not able to say if it is the case or not. Some of the same scribal features we find is this again a partially reconstructed document with parts on both collections, and we find again this alternation between bilinear fragments, as here you have all the letters in the same between the same 2 lines, and some much more quadrilinear segments. Worth of attention here is the ligature again of alpha with rho, and also the way the scribe has to have certain letter with strokes. We are turning on the right and going up. So this is the same letter as this, and written in a completely different way. Again, we tried to find other little fragments to add, to join to these 2 bigger fragments, and this was one of the candidates. I would say no, which can be discussed, of course, but I would say no for several reasons. The first is that the script on the lower part is much more horizontal. This the scribe here has the tendency to read in with the direction, upper direction, and this script seems more regular. But again, there are some common features, especially the ligatures again of alpha with rho. So it's a small fragment. It's also always difficult to draw conclusions from such tiny fragments. And this is the last example I will show. This is also a very recent join. An interesting one because here we have a document which continues on the verso. So it was a good way to confirm the joint. Both fragments are continuing on the verso. We also have the upper part of the document and the lower part. Of course, in between there is big uncertainty. We don't know how many fragments and even not how big was the space between the lower fragment and the upper fragments. The interesting thing in this writing, again, you see from what kind of glass Florent Jacques was able to take the fragments. The interesting thing here is that we have quite a thin reed. It's much thinner than it is thinner than in the other documents. There are again two forms for the mu. Here you have one, and here you have two. You have very special shapes of the alpha here, which it's quite different of this one, and perhaps more similar to the one of the delta here. And you have this very famous ligature called ligature in ace of spades, which is a ligature between epsilon and rho, very common in this kind of scripts. Remarkable here is also the abundance of diacritical signs, this short stroke on some letters. It's, as I said in the beginning, it's an important criterion to help to distinguish the scripts. And interesting in this document here also is that we have in the verso the name of the scribe, because the address is kept, and the scribe is called Abraham, which for the time being is not telling us much, but this is one of a new character in Papa's archive. This is I don't think I need a conclusion, because it was especially kind of I wanted to show you how we are working in as I said, in a very empirical way, trying to combine different approaches. And I am sure that with the help of Isabel's project, we are going to make decisive progress. Thank you for your attention.